Welcome back to Learning Unity with 3D Game Kit. In the last video, we got everything set up, ran a playthrough of the game, and got a first look at the Unity engine. If you're new to Unity, this video is for you. We'll be covering the core interface, navigation, and how Unity organizes objects in a scene. By the end of it, you'll have a solid foundation to start building your own game worlds, so let's jump in. If you are a veteran Unity user, you might not find too much value in this, so feel free to skip this one, or if you want to just check it out, come on in and join us. So let's get started. We left off here on the start screen. Now, this is great, and if we come into the scene view, you can see we have a whole lot going on, but if you're new to Unity, this is probably a bit too much to begin with. So let's go ahead and go back to that blank template that we began with. To do that, we can create a new scene by going to File and New Scene and just creating a new scene from scratch. You'll see we have two options. We have Empty or Basic Built-in. Empty is what it says. It's got nothing in it. Basic Built-in has the basic built-in things. Now, what is that? It's essentially a skydome light and a camera. Now, does it matter if we have those? Yeah, no, maybe. We're going to go ahead and start with the built-in though, so we have some stuff to grab, some stuff to look at to begin with. So let's go ahead and click Create and create this new scene file. Now, when you're in the scene view, this is your 3D space, and if you've worked with any 3D applications like Maya, Blender, 3ds Max, Modo, you'll be familiar with this. We can move around it just like we can any 3D space. If you click in here, though, you'll notice, hey, nothing happened. So how do we start the navigation? The way to do that is the Alt key. So what I'm doing here is I'm holding Alt and left click, and what this is allowing me to do is to rotate the camera here in a circle, and you'll see it's revolving kind of around a center point. Now, if you Alt and right click, you'll see you can zoom. So Alt left click, Alt right click are going to be your basic zooms. Now, for those of you who are Maya users, a lot of the stuff is the same as Maya, which is really cool. So for example, if I select this camera here, and let's say we want to focus up on it, you can hit the F key and you can frame that. And now that will be the source of your pivot, which is really convenient. So that's the basic movement that we have inside of the scene view here. With that said, if you're having a hard time finding the scene view, let's just go ahead and review the different views we have in here by default, so you know what's going on. To get started, we have the scene view, which is smack dab in the center here, where we've been working and navigating. Now, we can tell we're on that scene view because there's a scene tab here, but something to be aware of is we do have the game tab here, and depending on how many buttons you've clicked coming into Unity or what version you're in, there might be other tabs here. These allow you to switch between different screen views in your main area here. So when you're playing a game, for example, you don't necessarily need to see the scene view, so you can pull up the game view. Now, if you try and navigate in the game view, you'll notice you're not able to. Actually, looks like you can scale here. So notice the scale dial moving up there. That's Alt right click doing that. That is different than actually moving, okay? That's actually scaling the playable area. But you'll notice we don't actually move. And that's because what we are seeing is the camera's view here. So the main camera's view, that is what's coming up in the game view, and it's actually locked until we hit the play button. We hit the play button in the last video to play the game. If you go ahead and hit play now, you'll notice it has a very different effect. Well, not a very different effect. Quite frankly, it just does nothing. So you'll see it is still going to load the game, but it is going to allow us to play it, but the game has no controls. So we have no way to move the camera, we have no way to move the character. In short, we have no way to interact with it. And that's because no objects have been put into the world, and more importantly, no scripts. So while this loads, let's go ahead and talk about this idea of a script. For those of you who aren't familiar with scripts, scripts are how game engines run, and what these are is bits of code. Now, inside of Unity, this uses C#. You can actually switch what type of code it uses in some instances, but scripts are attached to game objects, which if you remember are these over here, to give rules and function to a game. Without scripts, we're not really going to have much going on, and that was the point of grabbing the 3D Game Kit, which we have down here. This is full of assets, and it's also full of the more important thing for us, which is scripts. Okay, so the game's loaded. You can see I can't do anything. We're just going to hit the pause button here to get back to it. Now let's go through the other menus here real quick. A really important one here is going to be our hierarchy. Our hierarchy is going to be where we see game objects. Game objects are everything that exists inside of our game level being our scene here. right? So we can see the camera, we can see the light, and we can see how those relate over here. For those of you who are familiar with 3D software, this acts like a hierarchy you would see in something like Maya. So you can do things like group in here, you can do things like parent, and we'll take a look at that in a little bit. Now, the other aspect of the hierarchy is it allows us to quickly select things, which is really nice when you have a lot of things in your scene. If you guys go back to one of the play scenes, you'll see there's a whole lot here. Very easy way to quick select things, which gives us access to their information over here in the inspector. The inspector can be thought of as the attribute editor. It's going to have everything that makes an object function. Game objects are simply nodes with lots of different attachments that turn them into what they are. So with the camera here selected, you can see that it has a transform parameter, which allows it to move. It has a camera parameter, which is what makes it a camera. And then it has something here called an audio listener, which allows us to hear sound through this source, which is important when we get into designing a level. If I go into something like the directional light, you'll see the directional light has similar parameters, and you'll notice that similar to other 3D softwares, it has a light input with a light type, it has a color, and then a few other parameters that we might explore later. We can manipulate all of those. Then if we get to the bottom of the screen, this is going to be where we are going to do some exploring today. There is the project section, and the project section actually is talking about a folder that lives on your desktop. So if I go ahead and navigate to the location of this folder, this is where my folder lives. It's in the folder I'm creating for this video. And if I come into this here, my project, you'll see this is the same as what we're seeing down in Unity. So right now it's collapsed, but you'll see if I go into my assets folder, for example, you'll see that 3D Game Kit folder. And if I go into that 3D Game Kit, you'll see all the various files associated with it. So this is actually accessing a file on your desktop. Now this gives us some really cool ways to work inside of Unity. We can work inside the assets folder directly in Unity, but we can also work inside of the asset folder in our file, depending on what is more convenient for us. So just be aware of that, but that's going to contain all the various things that we are going to navigate and grab. And we already played around with this a little bit in the last video. You'll see if I come down here to 3D Game Kit, I can click through these and I could go to something like art here, go into models, drop ship, and you can see here, there's going to be a model inside of here that we can access. So we'll explore that in a little bit, but that is going to be the project section and we're going to be doing quite a bit of work there. Then next to that is the console. This is going to be what throws us errors. And what's important to note is this is for people who do code. Now, we're doing this from kind of an introductory perspective, welcoming in everyone, but this channel is more about art. So we're not going to dabble in this too much. If you become a technical artist, they do write a lot of code. So you would want to get familiar with writing code in here for that. Or if your ultimate goal is to build your own games, you can check that out. We're just going to leave it as an honorable mention for this series. But hey, it might come up if there's an error. So let's go ahead and talk about some basic game objects and how to create them, what they are, and go from there. So game objects are going to be anything that exists inside of our scene. You can see that we have a camera, we have a light. Well, what else do we have? If you take a look up here, there is a game objects menu, and there is a whole lot of things that fall into the category of game objects. Now, the most basic game object is going to be the 3D object here. Something to be aware of is these 3D objects actually aren't really used in the final version of games. Maybe if you're doing a game jam, you might use these as finished geometry, but these are really more for learning and for gray boxing or blockouts of level. They can also be for building prototypes of prefabs. So the cool thing about these things called prefabs is you can actually swap them out. So in theory, you could build an entire world with this basic geometry, and as assets get finished, you could just plug them into these prefabs. So let's go ahead and start with a very basic one here, and kind of just set up something we can play with. So let's grab a cube. Cubes are nice because we can see them. Now, if you've ever worked with 3D software, you can tell that's a cube. Yay, we made a cube. Now, you'll see it loads into here. And what's neat about this is we can see it both in the hierarchy and we can see it in the inspector. Now, let's break down what's going on in the inspector. You can see it has a transform, just like our camera and lights did. But it has a few different things here, right? It has this cube mesh section here. So it has a mesh filter and a mesh renderer. This is telling Unity what it is and to render it. We can see this in how we see it. So under the mesh, this is the mesh type. It's going to be a cube. And you'll notice that it has a little input here. So we can actually swap these, and we'll take a look at that in a moment. It has the mesh renderer. So this is going to have the material attached, how it interacts with light, its interactions with things called probes. And then down here we have something called a box collider. Now, colliders deal with physics, and we'll talk about those later. Let's talk about moving this guy, though. You'll notice that there are some transforms on this to begin with, which is kind of weird. If you want to set a specific coordinate, just like other 3D software, you can come in here and type. So I'm going to set this to 0, 0. I'll just hit 0, and hit 0. Now, let's take a look at the movement gizmo. You can see here that we have our standard movement gizmo. You can use these arrows to move it in the cardinal directions of the 3D space, so the X, Y, Z axes. And like other software packages, you can pick these in-between ones here to move them in between. If you want to switch your gizmo, you can do so over on this little side panel right here. You'll see that it has our toolbar, but this is actually going to correlate to the hotkeys that a lot of other software use. So let's go ahead and talk about the hotkeys there. W is usually for move. E is usually for rotate. So I hit E on my keyboard and you can see it switched to the E. Now, for those of you who work in Maya, you might already notice, hey, that's the same as Maya. So E is going to get us here to rotate. W is going to put us back into move. And for those of you who are Maya users, you might already be aware that R is going to switch us into scale mode here. So we're W-E-R. W is going to be for move. E is going to be for rotate, and R is going to be for scale. Committing these to memory will make your scene building much, much faster inside of Unity. Now, you might notice there's a few others. There's this one here, which is the rectangle tool. This is another interesting tool. They've expanded it to work with objects, but this traditionally is for sprites. So kind of neat that they have it able to work with objects here. And this last one here is kind of a multi-gizmo tool, which does the whole gambit of things. There's also an edit bounding volume tool, which is going to control the box collider and not the actual geometry. So just be aware of that. Now, the collider is how far this collides with things. You can make it bigger, you can make it smaller. You might have seen in video games where, you know, the collision point of something is actually inside of it and you clip a little. And in other cases, you can't even get close to it. And that's going to be the controller of the box slider, something the user doesn't see. All right, so that is going to be kind of our basics here. Now, let's go ahead and reset these and talk a bit about the components here and talk a bit about the idea of prefabs. So let's go ahead and start with the idea of what a prefab is. When we talk about a prefab, what prefab stands for is a prefabricated object. Now, fabricated means to be made, right? So in short, it's something that is already made and we can drag and drop it a lot of different places. So let's say this box was actually a lamp. We could come in here and we could create something like a point light, and we could place this light above the object here and maybe give it a color that is distinct. So let's give it a nice strong orange color. And we can't really see it because our directional light, something that's cool about the directional light is if you turn it, it'll actually switch your day-night cycle. So I can switch that to nighttime. So now our little light we can see is illuminating this area. And just to give it something to illuminate, let's go ahead and come in here to our 3D objects plane. And I'm just going to hit R to scale that up so we get a bit of a space. And then I'm just going to select the cube and the light here, which has been named W for some reason, and just move these up. Now, let's talk a bit about hierarchies. You know, if you wanted to nest these together to make them the same, it's not really the best practice to put them right inside of each other. What we could do instead is come up here to game objects and create empty. And this is the same idea as creating a group. So we could create empty here and just name this lamp. And then what we can do is we can drag and drop these underneath. So I can take the cube, I can click drag and hover over the lamp and release. And you'll see that will nest it under. And I can do the same with my W here, which I might want to rename. If you want to rename, we can come to the top of the inspector here and just make this light. And then we can drag and drop that under here. Now you can either drop it using this blue line or on top by the gray. If you do the gray, it will put it at the bottom of the hierarchy. If you select blue, you can place its placement. Okay, so now we have this little lamp here, and if I grab the lamp's group, because it's in a hierarchy, you can see we can move this around. So I am assuming you guys know what a hierarchy is by now. That's going to create a parent-child relationship, where the parent is going to be able to move the child. So let's say I wanted to get a whole bunch more of these in here, but I wanted to make it so I could change the light and update all of them. The way we're going to do that is by creating a prefabs. Now, this is where the asset folder comes in. I'm going to just click asset here, and you'll see we have the 3D game kit and scenes. I'm going to create a new folder by right-clicking, going to create new folder, and we're just going to name this my prefabs. I might also name this demo prefabs because we might actually make some cool ones for this course, but we'll go ahead and click into here. And to create a prefab, all we have to do is grab our prefab construction here, our group, and drag it down here in assets. And if I release that, what it's going to do is create a prefab. Now you'll see a couple things happened. The lamp here turned blue. Blue text indicates a prefab. And the other thing that happened is we gained an asset in our folder down here. And this is the actual prefab asset. So let's say we wanted to make more of these. We wouldn't necessarily duplicate this. We would drag this into our scene. So let me go ahead and drag this prefab into our scene. And you can see now I'm dragging that entire construction into our scene. So outside of duplication, what makes prefab special? Outside of the ability to kind of quickly reproduce the same construction here, same placement, all that stuff, we can edit these. Now, to do so, it's best to go into prefab mode, and you'll notice that these little prefabs have a little arm next to them. If I go and click this, it's going to open the prefab into context, which means that we're in prefab mode. And I could come in here and I could change something like light here, for example, to be yellow. And what this is going to do is it's going to update all the other prefabs. And you might have seen that there. They did change color. If I hit the back arrow here, you'll see now all of their lights changed color. This can be very useful for prototyping. Like I mentioned, when we build a level, we could build the entire thing in Graybox, and we could swap in what we want later. So let's take a look at a more extreme here. Let's go ahead and click the over arrow here to get into our prefab. We can click into the cube here. And under the cube mesh, you can see there is a cube input. If you click this icon, it will actually search for all of the geometry inside of your scene. And you'll see we don't only have the cube in here, we have some of the geometry from the 3D game kit. Now, to make things simple, I'll just switch to a sphere, so that's not too complicated, but you'll see all of these get swapped to a sphere. And we could do the same with something like a capsule. We could even do the same with something like one of the kit objects, like this object here, and you'll see those will all update. All right, so that's the power of working with prefabs, is they allow us to quickly iterate and build our scene in an adaptive way that we can change later. Other really cool things about prefabs is that we can drag and drop in constructed prefabs from the 3D game kit. So if we come into the 3D game kit here and double click, you'll see there's all sorts of different things we can look at, but there is a prefabs folder, and we can click into here. Inside the prefabs, you'll see there's environment. We're going to have things like a dropship we could bring in, so we could just drag and drop this into here. It might take a moment, but you'll see there the dropship is, and it has all of these components built into it. You can see all these things are just set up for us, ready to go. The same goes with pretty much all of these. If we go to other options like characters, you can see that we have eel dogs, we have enemies, we have Ellen. We could actually grab Ellen here, and we could bring her into our scene. Sometimes it does take a moment to load these things, so just be aware of that. But we could bring Ellen into our scene, and you can see she has all sorts of stuff going on with her. Lots of little flips, switches, and dials, and that's because she is a character. She has VFX attached, sound effects, all sorts of stuff. Now, just to kind of test things out, let's go ahead and hit play here. And now that we have Ellen on our scene and we have this spaceship, we actually might be able to do something inside of our game. But we have a bit of an issue because Ellen just fell through the floor, so let's talk about that. But you can see the spaceship does have little jets, it has visual effects, which is pretty cool. Now, let's go find what happened to Ellen. Why is she falling through? There could be a lot of reasons. I don't know exactly how she's set up. If we want to modify her, we could. I actually don't know if she's using a collider system, which is another thing that's interesting. If I click on her, though, I do see that capsule collider, but it could have to do with layers. Now, we'll get into layers later. This one's currently on the default layer, but it might need to be on something else for that to work, like environment. It could also just be that we need a different collider. Maybe the mesh collider here isn't working. Not sure. We'll have to play around with that, but hey, let's see if maybe tagging that as environment works. And that's one of the challenges when you don't fully know a system, you might run into issues. So you can see tagging that with environment made it work. She dropped into the scene, but it looks like the character controller is actually set up differently. The WASD keys are not moving her. Oh, there they go. Well, I don't know what just happened. I hit spacebar, made her jump, and she fell off. So we'll need to dive into the template that they give us to kind of set up our scene. But hopefully that gives you an idea of the Unity user interface. It gives you an idea of prefabs and just kind of the basic construction of things inside of here. Okay, so let's go ahead and hit save. If you want to save your scene, you could do a save as. You could save this scene. Maybe we go ahead and just put this into our scenes folder here, and we call this our test scene, or maybe our gray box scene, where we go in, we play with things, and we just kind of see what we can do. Okay, so what I want you to do is just kind of play around, follow along with the things I did here. We're not really trying to build anything solid. We're going to get into working with the template in the next video that is going to allow us to kind of just kick off the scene creation with this kit, and everything should be functioning correctly, hopefully, inside of that scene. All right, that's going to be it for this video. You now have a basic understanding of Unity's user interface, how to navigate the scene, how objects work inside of your game world. In the next video, we're going to start building our game using the Game Kit tools. If you found this helpful, don't forget to like the video and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one.